Hey everybody, I'm Jack Reed with Future Pastimes, and this is Battle Language, where I'm having a chat with other people. In this case, I'm joined by Mr. Nobody, and we're going to have a short chat as we talk about the potential to make some faction changes if there is a new edition of Dune that comes out. Now, we do know that Gale Force 9 is planning to do something they're calling the Kwisatz Haderach Edition, which is billed primarily, I think, as just a deluxe edition of the game. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do any changes to anything, but if you read through the comments, and I have another video coming up where I actually go through all the comments and comment on those comments. But if you read comments there and on Board Game Geek, and on this channel even there are a significant number of players that would love to see some tweaks, not necessarily a complete overhaul. And I think, with the existence of Dune Conquest, where you have a very streamlined version of the game, we're not talking about anything of that nature because that already is filling a particular niche. But for people who do want still the epic Dune experience that you can get from the classic Dune board game, but I think some areas where there's ambiguity or there are some loopholes, or just as a balancing to make all of the factions as competitive as possible. I think there's definitely some room for some stuff. So I know that Mr. Nobody has some thoughts on three factions in particular. So that's what we're going to talk about and focus on today. We have the Bene Gesserit, the Emperor, and the Fremen, and these are, I think, the Bene Gesserit and the Fremen especially are on a lot of players' list. The Bene Gesserit, with there's a lot of confusion about spiritual advisors and fighters, and some as well on the nature of the voice or the strength of the voice. And with the Fremen, a sense of competitiveness, especially with the current edition where you have a basic set of rules and an advanced set of rules. And the Fremen seem like they're much weaker in basic. But do they have as good a win rate anyway in advanced either? That's the other thing. And then, of course, the Emperor. I'm certainly happy to talk about it. So, Mister Nobody, let's start with you. What do you want to touch on first?
Yeah, I guess we could kind of talk about the Emperor because I know we'll save some of the juicier bits for the BG and the Fremen later. But the Emperor is a faction that has always like really intrigued me, especially now like that we have the Riches and that we have the Ikaz and the Moritani, because they all have like those tokens that they can put down on the board that has like a specific kind of in-game effect, whether it's like extra troops that you don't know about, or in the case of Moritani it's a terror token that it could be anything from kill a leader, steal your money, gain money, blow the whole place up kind of thing. And with the Emperor, I always wished that he had a way of lending his ally his Sardaukar. And one of the changes that I think that I personally would make to the Emperor is I would love for him to have like a group of tokens that he could give to his ally, and basically his ally could count a certain number of their forces in that battle as Sardaukar. Like I think it would just be awesome, and even give him like like a zero token, kind of how Riches has one of those. Um, I also would really like to see the wording of how and when he can share his money between allies kind of cleaned up. Because I know that like when I first got the game and I was kind of looking online to try to figure out, well, what does share your great wealth mean? Because like it's more of a phrase than it is necessarily like a rule, quote unquote, so to say. So just whether it's like a timing thing or maybe it's like limited to like, hey, like once per turn, you can give any amount, of spice that you want to your ally, something kind of to that effect. Um, I mean, overall, for the most part, I think that the Emperor is, he's a pretty straightforward, kind of faction to play. There's a lot of nuance to them, but I definitely think that if I can make one change, I might replace the can get extra forces out in place for the Sardaukar tokens, and then just kind of clean up the wording for the what it specifically means to share great wealth. How often you can do that. Is it a once per round thing, or excuse me, once per game round or once per turn thing, once per phase thing. Something to just kind of give a lot of clarity on like when and how those kind of things work.
Yeah, it's interesting how many people, especially before any FAQs, read "You may share your great wealth with your allies" and thought it was, I don't know, some kind of poetic bit of meaningless text.
Yeah.
But that was not the case. I mean, and they're like, oh, does that mean that, is this just referring to the fact that they can revive these forces? And it's like, well, no, it says as well as paying Spice directly to the bank for the revival of up to
Yeah, yeah.
three forces. And so, yeah, I think that the original designers were thinking this seems as straightforward to us as it can be. You may share your wealth. Here you go. Here it is. There's no
Yeah, yeah.
restrictions at all, and that is the current play.
Sure.
But there's
Yeah.
definitely, I think, there's all kinds of effects that makes this sharing of the wealth feel like it's a loophole, or it's just something that's maybe too bonkers. So one of the things that I've been talking about with other people is the idea that the emperor can freely give spice, but similar to how the Bene Gesserit have to make a decision before shipping a movement about flipping their advisors to fighters, that there might be some kind of look. Once you get to a certain phase, that's it. They can't transfer any more wealth over. They can bank a bunch of stuff ahead of time. They can go here. We're getting up to whichever phase it ends up being. Here's 12 spice. Do with this as you will. And maybe the answer is that they can give the spice and it goes in front of the player's shield. That And then they can just, that's their spice that they can use for whatever they want. Although I wouldn't want to have any confusion about, well, this is my bribe spice over here, this is my emperor's spice. So I think maybe limiting it to a phase, like, all right, this can go behind your shield, it's part of your spice stockpile, but after bidding, or maybe after revival, that's it. The emperor can still pay for your shipment, and they can still pay for your cards. That's something any ally can do. I think if there's another edition, paying for revivals might be something that is on the table again, because it does seem strange that that's an exclusion. So I would want to look at that. The Sardaukar idea is interesting. I like it for its thematics, and it's something that, like if in the new movie, they had the Sardaukar. They weren't disguised, and that was a strange choice, to not do that, to just be obvious about, yeah. But I guess they were figuring there's not going to be any witnesses. We're killing everybody, so it doesn't really matter if they're disguised or not.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think in terms of gameplay, it's something that would have to be looked at very carefully to see how is that implemented. What happens after the battle? Do those forces go away? You having to ship them out again? And so it's worth looking at. I think it's interesting. So yeah, let us know in the comments what you think of that as a concept. I know there's a lot of people, what they love about the Emperor is that it's so simple. It's very straightforward. It's just two things. One is they're getting spice for cards, and then they have these five tokens that count double. It is pretty straightforward. If you exclude the whole strange math of spy styling, which I think if there is another edition, that's going to be at the top of the list of things to look at. But when it's like, all right, I've got three normal forces, two Sardaukar, and I've got three spice, and now I have to get out an abacus to figure out what I can dial and all the different permutations, and that's the thing that I think a lot of players like the least about it.
Mhm.
But I think it's something that's worth looking at. Yeah, I mean, I would say that a lot of people don't necessarily have the Emperor very high on their list of factions that need any kind of tweaks or changes. But again, if you're going to do a new edition, I think you need to re-examine everything. As part of the design team, presumably, I would want to definitely have a look at it and get some consensus about that. So, again, if you're watching this video, let us know your thoughts and if there's something different about the Emperor that you would want to have looked at or examined. So that's an interesting start. Let's skip over to let's leave the Bene Gesserit for last. Let's look at the Fremen next. They have and I've talked about the Fremen, and we did recently a strategy video, battle language on the Fremen, where we kind of described them as a faction that has a lot of half advantages. There aren't a lot of things that are especially sexy and impactful. There's some stuff that's like, this is pretty good, this is decent, this is better than in many ways than what other factions can do, but nothing super flashy. The closest thing is you've got the Fedaykin, but they only have three of those, and that's one of the things that I know I've wanted to look at. But again, there's no. I don't think there's a simple like, oh, just do this and that, and then voila, it's a change. So everything will need to be re-examined. But what are your thoughts there on the Fremen and where you'd like to see them go?
Yeah, so I actually tried two small changes to them in a couple of my in real life games with some of my friends. And one of the changes that I tried was I gave them a start of game setup advantage. So kind of like how the Ixians get to look at the starting opening cards, they get to pick one, shuffle the rest up, and then that kind of gets distributed out amongst the rest of the players. I was like, well, hey, why don't we try to give the Fremen they can start with one of two cards. They can either start with a Chris knife because it makes sense because that's like their very religious weapon that they use, right? And it's a weapon that if you see it it's going to draw blood in their culture. And then the other option was, or they could start with a Karama card, right? Because Karama is like the miracles, right? The unexplained things that really drive a lot of the religious teachings and believings in the culture. So we tried that. It actually helped them out quite a lot, because if you can start with a weapon, it means that you can't just go over to the Fremen who didn't necessarily buy a card. Maybe they have a worthless card, maybe they have um, a truth trance or something. They can't necessarily use it against you. But if hey, they got a Chris knife potentially, or in the bidding phase, if they've got a Karama, and they end up spinning it, they could have got a las gun or something else, right? And then the other thing that we did was we gave them almost like this hit and run kind of feel, where we let them. So basically, at the start of their battles, they could either add or remove. We tried three forces, so you can either remove three forces out of the battle or add three forces into the battle from your reserves, and it kind of gave them this sort of surprise attack element, because that was one of the big things in the book too, which was that the Fremen sort of appeared and disappeared, in and out of the desert, sort of at will, which was part of the reason why it was hard for for the emperor and the Harkonnen and everyone else to really know like what kind of forces they were dealing with, whenever the battles would initially commence. So we tried that, and actually both of those things had a very positive impact on the way that they played and the way that they felt, because it meant that they could, if they knew it was a battle they weren't going to win, they could minimize the forces that were lost. Or if it was a battle that they were like, I really think I can win this, but I need a little extra oomph, they could just put extra guys in there. And we ended up actually playing with the homeworlds too, and it had a lot of beautiful synergy with the southern hemisphere, being able to send the Fatakin out amongst those stacks during revival, and then you get some extra oomph, kind of later on. So those are some of the things that we tried. And they weren't overly complicated. It wasn't something that, drastically, it's like you don't have like extra special rules necessarily that you're kind of pondering over. You just have a simple setup, and then you have a kind of start a battle thing, and it was surprisingly fun. But the one thing that we all kind of came to the consensus to was that they need something to kind of get them like a little bit of a jump out of the start, because three spice isn't very much. Most of the time, everybody else is going to outbid you, those first couple rounds, especially if you're not able to get to a good spice blow. So, yeah, we felt it was maybe not necessarily the correct fix, but it was definitely like headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I think there's definitely areas to look at. I would be a little bit leery about letting them start with specific cards simply because I feel like it's opening up a door for, well, why doesn't this faction start with a specific card? It's very thematic to them. Or why doesn't this one
Hmm.
have in there? And the other thing is just the card knowledge with like the if if they don't use a Karama by the end of bidding, everyone's like, that's probably a Chris knife that they've got, and so the Bene Gesserit are like, well, great, I've got a shield, so I'm just gonna go force them to use it in a battle and overwhelm them and get rid of that and other things, just exploiting that knowledge. So I like more mystery in the start, but having some
Hmm.
more effective combat element. So the thing with the extra forces, I think, is to me more interesting just because it lets them use their numbers, becomes a real strength that other players are going to have to start accounting for. And so I think that's an interesting concept, but I definitely would want to look at a number of different things to make them um, not just competitive, more competitive in the early game, but just throughout the game. And so I
Hmm.
think that because if they, if they're like, oh, we started with that card and then we lost it in our first battle, then you're like, well, it's like now we're back to square one where we don't have any spice and we don't have any of those other advantages. So I would want something that has more staying power for the Fremen. But like you said, I think it's speaking to a clear deficiency, whether it's simply perceived or real. Like I know some people who are like, no, the Fremen are the strongest faction in the game, and it's a lot of it is just your ability to take advantage of when to leverage all of these little miniature things that they can do, capitalizing on them when they do occur. Because some of them are very situational, like riding the worm and your knowledge of the storm and storm losses as an advantage. It's pretty situational. So there's not
Hmm.
a lot. There's not a lot in here. Even their shipping, like okay, it's free, but it has limitations. So they can only actually do that into half of the board, and their movement is better on average. But even that can be used against them. So I would like to see something added to the Fremen to make them give them a little more punch. That's more. It's a reliable. It's a consistent and reliable tool for them to use. But yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I think I think the biggest thing for them right now is they very much feel like an attrition faction that's either going to like drain your resources, drain your troops, because like they can doom stack. It doesn't necessarily cost them anything unless somebody karamas them, and they can recover a lot faster than the guild. They're not deadly, so they're not quite, it's like if you lose against the Fremen, you lose a battle. If you lose against the Harkonnen, it's incredibly punishing. When you fight against the BG, it can be very, very deadly for you, trying to crack through that armor necessarily. So I think for them, yeah, I think really what they need is they need something that makes them feel like that you don't want to mess with these guys, because in the books, I mean, they're kind of like the top dogs, they're the mightiest warriors in the galaxy at this time, and so it's like, but they don't feel that way. You know what I mean? Like I'm not necessarily scared whenever I go into a battle with them. I'm just like, oh, I might lose, or based on the numbers, yeah, I'll probably lose this one, so I don't, I just get rid of some worthless cards or whatever. But yeah, I agree with you. There's like it's they're a dog that just needs like a little bit stronger of a bite.
Yeah, I mean, I think the attrition thing is interesting because I do feel like it is a thematic element. It's not like, well, I mean, the Fremen had the capability of overwhelming others, but there's reasons why they didn't. There's reasons why they didn't just all come flocking up into Carthage and Arakeen and just overrun the cities and take control. And part of that, I think, was a firepower thing, because they're more of a guerrilla strength, and so they knew that if the Harkonnen just deployed lots of ornithopters and combat ships into open warfare with them, that the Fremen were not going to win. They were not going to win those kinds of battles. And so I like the idea of maybe taking attrition and turning it on its ear, and making it more of their getting stronger the longer the game goes on. So it's less about
Mm-hmm.
well, we're building towards this Fremen victory condition, which is really just about a couple of tactical strikes to make sure that specific factions aren't in specific locations, which I find to be a little bit goofy, because people, they're always having to, like, let me go back and read this again so that I get all of the dots connected. Okay, I need to be here, and then nobody, or I need to be there, and then nobody, or but not this faction or this faction. As I think it needs to be something that's a little bit simpler. And I like the idea of it's just the Fremen are getting stronger, and it's going to be inevitable. So, if you haven't managed to get the victory condition by the end of the 10th game turn, the Fremen are just going to be in such a powerful position that they're just going to walk all over whoever's left. And that I like better because I think it is more thematic, and it does kind of light a fire under the other factions. But again, as we said, there's definitely some areas where I think there could be some improvements, and this is going to be one of the factions that we look at the most closely. So yeah, chime in on the comments if you're watching this and let us know. Let us know what you think of the ideas that have been floated so far, and any other that come across you as we shift over finally to the Bene Gesserit, which is that's the real thing. This is the faction that nobody considers a weak faction. So the changes here are not about, we've got to make the Bene Gesserit more competitive. They have arguably the most powerful faction advantage, possibly too powerful. There have been some that have said, the voice needs to be revisited and perhaps tempered. I don't think to the point with like Dune Conquest, there is a voice advantage, and it only affects weapons, and it just has the three categories: poison, projectile, and then special as just a general category, and that's what you're doing. I don't think that we need to go that far, so I do like to have give the Bene Gesserit some more options there with the voice. But right now it does feel a bit hodgepodgey, and it's a little bit messy. But even messier is the spiritual advisors, and a lot of that is just due to understanding. All right, what about this situation? What about that situation? These are fighters over here. Those are advisors. I'm trying to move. I'm trying to ship, and that is just not. It's not very clear. And a lot of it was just they were trying to use the most concise language they could to fit everything, because they have filled both sides of that faction sheet. There's a little bit of white space that they might have been able to better serve. And in fact, I've redone this faction sheet myself, to make it clear. But I think there's some changes here, and I think the biggest one that I would want to look at, and I'll get your thoughts here in just a second, but just this This thing that we in the gaming community call the Nova flipping, which is you've got this line on the faction sheet, which like if the advisors are ever alone in a territory, they flip to fighters, and so if you've got advisors in a territory and the other factions fight it out and full dial, and then you've just got advisors are left and like, great, we claim Carthage in the name of the queen, that sort of thing, where they can just kind of pop up and gain control of it. And I think it certainly it wasn't the design intent, although that is a basket of worms right there, since spiritual advisors and coexistence was added by Avalon Hill, not by the original designers. And so even they struggle with what's the best way to word this. But let's turn it over to you and let's see what have your thoughts been. What has your group looked at or discussed in terms of how to make the Bene Gesserit a cleaner faction?
Yeah, so like it's in expansion 3, you've got like those hidden sieges that get revealed, like the discovery tokens and stuff. And the rule for those is that you can't actually enter them until it's like the start of the next turn. So I just think like it's really simple. Advisors can't flip until the start of the next turn. Even if they're the only ones in the space. I think that that's pretty clear verbiage, and I think it cleans up a lot of the problems and a lot of the issues. Because while they're advisors, they, for all intents and game purposes, like they're not on the map. Like they're not claiming territories, they're not collecting spice. They're just kind of like placeholders for where they could potentially decide to flip and then quote unquote like appear on the map. Because I agree with you, it does feel kind of lame when it's like the Bene Gesserit have just quietly placed advisors, and you've got four other factions that are fighting. One of them had to full dial to win because they're going against the Harkonnen, and they didn't want to get their leaders taken, so they're both out of there. Boom, BG flips. The same thing. Maybe there's another fight where double traders called. They're both out of there. Boom, the BG flips, and it's like, well, wait a second. They're here. They shipped to Habanya. Nobody went to Habanya. Oh, look, they just won. It does feel kind of anticlimactic. So yeah, so I definitely agree with you. I do think there probably needs to be some sort of window of like when they can flip, the conditions at which they can flip, things like that. um Another thing that I see often too is like people get a little confused, like, hey, can I ship into a location where they're advisors and they're not fighters, kind of thing. And you're right. I think based on like the previous language and the older language, it's like, well, yes, they're not there for like game purpose effects, like we were saying, like collection and stronghold control, and contesting and battling and stuff, but there's still like a stack you can send to. So it's like that kind of stuff probably also needs to be clarified a bit. I would imagine. Really, and I'm probably going to be in the minority of this because this doesn't necessarily hurt the Bene Gesserit, what I'm about to say. If anything, people might be like, you're outside of your mind for even beginning to suggest this. But one of the things that I always kind of wish that they could do, with a few caveats, is I always wished that, because as it is now, they don't actually have a Karama power because they can use any of the worthless cards, as just sort of the generic Karama ability, the half rate shipping, immediately win a treachery card, or turn off somebody else's power. But I always wish, like, either if they had like an actual Karama, or maybe they had to spend like two worthless cards to do this, or maybe they had to do some combination of that and then remove the advisors that they have like in the territory they do this. I do kind of wish they had a once per game thing where they could use the voice at like in favor of like one of the two factions that are fighting, because I think it would be a very it'd be very interesting and sort of like razor's edge sort of feel, because their prediction, for example, I think is one of the most exciting things about them. Because I've been in games where, you know, me and my ally went on turn 4, and the BG is like, well, actually, like, I knew this the whole time, and I'm actually the one that won. So, and the prediction can be a little random. It can be, kind of all over the place, and it's not a consistent way that they end up winning. But I do think, as far as like a level of excitement, or doing something that just like makes it crazy, crazy spicy, so to say. I think it would be cool to give them maybe like a once per game thing. And like I said, I don't know if it's probably not necessarily balanced, or you may have to have some severe penalties or something for them to do that, to kind of even it out. But that's one of the things I always wanted to see. But I think most of what you had said, like in some of your previous videos about the BG, or just some discussing online or in the Discord or on the forums, you know, the they don't necessarily need help winning, because they're already such a powerful ally. They get the free shipping with the advisors. Now with the addition of homeworlds, they get even, you can get even more Benny Gesserit sisters on the board for free. So I think they're overall in a pretty good position. But yeah, I think cleaning up some of the language, putting some limitations on what they when they can flip, the circumstances in which they can flip. Is there a decision point at time where, for example, if you beam in and I decide, okay, hey, I'm going to be advisors, does that stack have to stay advisors essentially for the rest of the turn? Or can I later on, if I decide to move out, go back to fighters, kind of thing? Like, I think those kind of things can probably be clarified. As far as the voice goes, that's really tricky, because the voice is like, it's such an iconic power in classic Dune, and it's part of the reason why they make such a compelling ally. Um, I don't really hear anyone necessarily calling for prescience to get nerfed. And prescience is kind of like the next one, like, right underneath the voice, as like being, one of the premier combat abilities in the game. Um, yeah, I'm not sure. I think I would probably have to think about it a little more, or maybe like try out some things a little more. Because I know in Conquest, the fact that they can only manipulate your weapon played against them does kind of give you, as the opponent of the Bene Gesserit, some leeway. Like, you go in knowing, okay, like, hey, like, I've got the projectile weapon, a poison weapon, and a slow dart, or I got the projectile weapon, a poison weapon, and the laser gun. So whichever one they say I can't play, I might be able to play like that third option, kind of as a workaround. And you can still do it, in this version too. But I I don't know. Like I said, I need to think about that a little more. I've never really necessarily viewed the voice as a problematic ability. It can be frustrating at times, and it can be like, God, man, like you know, like I only have a projectile weapon, and if they say I can't play it, then I'm kind of hosed. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on them.
Yeah, for me, I think it's useful to go back and compare the Avalon Hill experience. So there, they they couldn't they couldn't affect a cheap hero. They could say play a worthless card, and you only had the one special card, the lace gun, and
The laser gun character.
yeah, so it was a simpler approach to voice. We don't have that paradigm here in the Gale Force 9, because there are multiple special weapons and some special defenses, and so it's gotten more complex. They've decided to add the cheap hero in, although there is some contradiction there if you're depending on what you're looking at. But so a lot of it, I think, is just clarifying and cleaning up the language, but I think cleaning up the effect as well. So my 2 cents is that it doesn't need to be nerfed in any really meaningful way. Like I would kind of go back and I would say, let's leave cheap heroes out of it. I might even say, I know, let's not even get into worthless cards. Let's just limit it to weapons and defenses. But it's an area that I would want to look at, and if nothing else, just clarify how it works, and even potentially put in some examples so that you're getting out ahead of a lot of what does end up showing up in those FAQs of like, well, what about this? They've got chemistry, which is a defense, but it can be a weapon if they play it with the defense, and I'm telling them I want them to play a poison weapon. Do they have to comply with that? Does it mean they have to play a shield so that, and then they must play chemistry so that it counts as a poison weapon? And so, those are the sorts of questions that people don't intuitively know what the right answer is. And I don't want to
Yeah.
avoid that. I want to remove as many speed bumps and detours from gameplay as possible, to just making it easy. So if it was the sort of thing where, like, yeah, you just say, you don't have to name the specific special, but you can just say, you must play a special, or you may not play a special, that a special weapon. Or a special defense, clarifying that to that degree. The other problem that happens is, like, on the actual faction sheet, it says things like snooper and shield, and we now have a situation where you can have a poison defense that is not a snooper, and a projectile
Right.
defense
Right.
that is not a shield. And so if I say, well,
Right.
you can't play a shield, then you're like, well, haha, I played Weirding Way. And so really what we were driving at was, you can't play a projectile defense. And so that language needs to just be consistent and clear. And again, probably an example or two on the sheet so that people can go, okay, well, it says right here, there, it's part of the example. So that seems clear to me. Whether it needs
Yeah.
to be radically changed, I don't think a radical change, but I would want to revisit it, because I think it's just like I said, it's a cornucopia of different things that I think needlessly complicates what the voice is or should be. And yeah, I think that's worth looking at. But in terms of the spiritual advisors, a lot of it is just clarification. And again, you go back to the Avalon Hill edition. It explicitly said that they're on the board, but they don't count as if they're being on the board, although they're affected by any kind of negative effect that would affect your troops. So you can get blown up, you can get wiped out by the storm, you can get eaten by worms. So you're not protected from those things, but it doesn't prevent your ally from entering in that territory, and it doesn't block a stronghold by having an advisor in there. And the other confusing thing is that people are like, oh, I want to just ship advisors in there. And that was never the intention either. The advisor is not part of the Bene Gesserit shipment. It's somebody else's shipment. So the only way that they can go down there as advisors is with somebody else's shipment. And that's not clear here either, but that's something that I would want to
Yeah.
clear up. And then, I think the answer there is a phase limitation. So, you're right now,
Right.
we've got the wording of, you decide before shipping a movement, do you want to flip? And I think I would just add to that, like, all right, and at that point they don't flip. They're if they're advisors at this point, they will stay advisors. I think the one exception would be if I've moved them out and I move them into a territory and nobody's there, then they can flip. That's the thing. So
Okay.
yeah, that I think would
Yeah.
make sense. But again, it needs to be explicitly stated on the faction sheet. Um,
Oh, what about advisors coexisting with their ally? Like, this
yeah,
one
I
kind of
mean
comes up from
that
time to
that
time.
is how it was supposed to be. And I think in order to, they wanted to try to, I don't know what they were trying to do, but in order to try to fix one perceived problem, they created another one. So they're like, oh no, they can't be in the territory with their allies. And so that created some weird situations where, like, so I can't even ship into Arakeen where those advisors are. And so they weren't sure about that. And so that was their solution to, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about Nova flipping because they can't even be in that territory. But that's also was never the intention. It was supposed to be, yeah, they can be there because it's like they're not there. That's how it's supposed to work.
Right. Right.
But if
Yeah.
they declared that they were coexisting, then they're in that coexistence state. And I've mentioned this in other videos. The Avalon Hill didn't have tokens with an advisor side and a fighter side. They were fighters on both sides because it was just blue. And it wasn't even a symbol on there. It was just blue tokens. And so you just had to remember, oh, yeah, they said earlier that they were coexisting in this territory. So that's the case. This is definitely a better way to implement that with the two-state tokens. But the rules need to make sense and they need to be consistent. And so that
I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine how many like arguments and like broken friendships came from like you said you were advisors. No, I didn't. They're
not there,
fighters. Like, oh,
there. Yeah, so
yeah, yeah. It's like,
I'm
oh my
sure.
god, yeah.
Yeah, if that happened to you, please let us know. We want the hot goss
God.
on on that
Oh
old
wow.
Avalon Hill implementation. So yeah, and I think again, if there is a second edition, we probably would want to give a good look. I think the win condition there for the guild is also top of everybody's list. Trying to make the guild a more active participant rather than just a spoiler. And I would want to even revisit all of the expansion factions and look at potential tweaks. I already have my list of tweaks, but yeah, we may do a future video where we maybe give a little more time and then we'll say, all right, let's look at the expansion factions. I can tell you what won't change is face dancers. That's not changing. But whether you like it or love it or hate it, I love it. So it's not ever going to go away. Um, but yeah, there are certain other things and clarifications. Zol, how much does it recall? Even now, when we say it's 3 spice, people are like, "So half of three?" And they're like, "No, it's three, and it's
Three
it's
is the
three
price.
spice
Yeah.
exactly." That is your discounted price because we're looking at the cost of the highest leaders, and then you're getting the discount. So I think three is very fair. But yeah,
Mm.
there's definitely there's probably some clarifications that we could still do on some of these sheets, and maybe even some improvements. So let us know in the comments which factions you'd like to hear the battle language panel discuss for a new edition of Dune, if there is such a thing. And again, we don't know. We don't know what Gale Force Nine's plans are with Kwisatz Haderach. Will it be a new edition of the game? Will it just be high quality components and a much bigger board with maybe a yellow line where the Fremen can ship in? So that's everybody wants that, and there's no reason not to have it. So I would anticipate something there for that. But yeah, I for one would love to see them say, yeah, Kwisatz Haderach is going to be a new and definitive edition of Dune, and we are going to do some minor changes to some of the factions to make them easier to understand, easier to play, still competitive and thematic, and that's the goal there. So let us know in the comments what you think of these ideas, what ideas you have. We want to hear them and decide which ones we agree with and which ones we cannot stand, and try not to make anyone feel bad about that. So thank you again, Mr. Nobody, for joining me for this edition of Battle Language as we looked at that, and we'll be discussing this and more on this channel in the future. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.